I held the lunchbox in my trembling hands, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the office chatter around me. The white crystals on the rim shimmered under the fluorescent light like sugar, but David Lawson's pale face told me otherwise. "Margaret, listen to me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "If your son has been eating this, he may already be in danger. You need to get him checked immediately. Don't waste a second." I froze. The cheerful laughter of my employees turned into silence. The world around me collapsed into a tunnel of fear. Benjamin, my only child, the boy I had raised alone after losing my husband, the one I lived and breathed for, was in danger. I wanted to believe it was just a mistake, a silly mix-up. Clara, my daughter-in-law, had accidentally switched. The lunchboxes, nothing more. She was sweet, attentive, the perfect wife for my son. But as I clutched that container, my mother's intuition screamed at me. This was no accident. "David, what are you talking about?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. "It's just lunch. What could possibly—" "Look at the residue, Maggie." He pointed to the white powder clinging to the edge of the container. "I worked in toxicology for 15 years before joining your company. I'd recognize that anywhere." The room started spinning. I glanced down at the chicken salad sandwich, the apple slices, the homemade cookie, all prepared with love by Clara that morning. Food meant for my son. Food he had been eating for months. "What is it?" I whispered. David's eyes met mine, filled with a heaviness I'd never seen before. "I think it's arsenic, Maggie." The word hit me like a physical blow. Arsenic. Poison. I'd read about it in mystery novels, seen it in crime shows. But this was my life, my son's life. "I could be wrong," David added quickly. "But please don't take any chances. Get Benjamin to a hospital now." I fumbled for my phone with shaking fingers, dropping it twice before managing to dial Benjamin's number. Each ring felt like an eternity. When his voicemail answered, my blood ran cold. "He's not picking up," I said, panic rising in my throat. "Try his office," David suggested, his hand steady on my shoulder. I called Benjamin's workplace, a prestigious financial firm in downtown Washington, D.C. The receptionist answered with practiced cheerfulness. "Wallace Financial, how may I direct your call?" "This is Margaret Wallace, Benjamin's mother. I need to speak with him immediately. It's an emergency." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wallace, but Mr. Wallace called in sick today. He mentioned severe stomach cramps and nausea. His wife picked him up about 2 hours ago." The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor. Clara had Benjamin. Clara, who might have been poisoning my son. Clara, who stood to inherit my entire fortune if anything happened to Benjamin. "Maggie?" David's voice seemed to come from far away. "Maggie, breathe." I couldn't. My lungs refused to work. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. "We need to call the police," I managed to gasp. "Not yet," David said firmly. "We need evidence first. Let's get to the hospital, find Benjamin. If I'm wrong, we can all laugh about this later." But he wasn't wrong. Deep down, I knew it. The pieces were falling into place. Benjamin's mysterious flu that kept recurring, his weight loss, the hair I'd noticed on his brush, all signs I'd attributed to stress from his demanding job. I grabbed my purse and the poisoned lunchbox. "My car's in the garage," I said, already moving toward the door. "I'll drive," David insisted. "You're in no condition." We raced through the streets of Washington, D.C., weaving through midday traffic with a desperation I'd never felt before. I called every hospital in the city, my voice growing more frantic with each one. "Georgetown University Hospital has a Benjamin Wallace admitted an hour ago," the 5th receptionist finally told me. "What's his condition?" I demanded. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can only release that information to immediate family." "I'm his mother. You'll need to speak with the attending physician when you arrive." David pressed harder on the accelerator, sensing my mounting fear. I stared out the window, watching the familiar landmarks of the city blur past. This was the same route I took to Sunday brunches at Benjamin and Clara's house. The same streets where Benjamin had learned to drive, where I had built my business, my life, after losing my husband. How could I not have seen this? I whispered, more to myself than to David. "Seen what exactly?" David asked carefully. "The signs, Clara's questions about the company, her obsession with my will, the way she'd joke about how wealthy Benjamin would be someday." I pressed my palm against the cool window glass. "I thought she loved him." "Let's not jump to conclusions," David said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Maybe there's an explanation." We pulled into the emergency room parking lot with a screech of tires. I was out of the car before David had fully stopped. running toward the entrance with the lunchbox clutched against my chest. The antiseptic smell hit me as the automatic doors slid open, bringing back memories of my husband's final days in this very hospital. "Benjamin Wallace," I told the receptionist, my voice breaking. "I'm his mother. Where is he?" The young woman tapped at her computer. "He's in room 307, ma'am, but visitors are limited to—" I was already moving toward the elevators, David close behind me. The ride to the third floor felt endless. When the doors finally opened, I spotted a police officer standing outside a room midway down the hall. My heart stopped. "Why is there police?" I whispered. "I don't know," David admitted. "But stay calm. We don't know anything for certain yet." As we approached, the officer straightened, his hand moving instinctively to his belt. "Can I help you?" "I'm Margaret Wallace," I said, forcing strength into my voice. "That's my son's room." "What's happening? Why are you here?" The officer's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Wallace, the doctor has been trying to reach you. Your son was brought in with symptoms consistent with poisoning. Hospital protocol requires us to notify authorities in such cases." "I need to see him," I insisted, moving toward the door. "The doctor is with him now," the officer said, stepping aside. "But I should warn you, there's been a complication." When I pushed open the door, the scene before me would be forever burned into my memory. Benjamin lay unconscious, tubes snaking from his arms, monitors beeping steadily beside him. His skin had a grayish tint, his cheeks hollow. And there, sitting beside him, clutching his hand and sobbing, dramatically, was Clara. She looked up when I entered, her perfect mascara somehow still intact despite her tears. "Maggie," she cried, rushing toward me. "Thank God you're here. The doctors say he's been poisoned. Who would do such a thing?" I stared into her eyes I'd once thought were filled with love for my son, and saw nothing but cold calculation. The truth left me mortified. "Mrs. Wallace?" A tall doctor with silver-streaked hair approached me, clipboard in hand. "I'm Dr. Chen. I've been treating your son since his arrival." I tore my gaze away from Clara, who had retreated to Benjamin's bedside, performing the role of devoted wife with Oscar-worthy precision. "How is he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Stable, but critical," Dr. Chen replied, leading me to a corner of the room. "The preliminary toxicology report shows elevated levels of arsenic in his system. This doesn't appear to be a one-time exposure. The tests suggest chronic poisoning over several months." David stepped forward, introducing himself. "I'm David Lawson, a former toxicologist. I suspected arsenic when I saw residue on this." He held up the lunchbox. "This food was prepared for Benjamin this morning but mistakenly given to Mrs. Wallace instead." Dr. Chen's eyes widened. "We should have this analyzed immediately." "What's going on?" Clara's voice cut through the room. She'd approached silently, those innocent blue eyes now narrowed with suspicion. "What's that? Ben's lunchbox?" "I was looking for that this morning." "Were you?" I asked, unable to keep the chill from my voice. "You seemed certain you'd packed it in his briefcase." Clara's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "I thought I had. I must have been confused." She reached for the container. "I'll take that." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "The doctor needs to examine it." "Examine it? For what?" Her voice rose an octave, that perfect facade beginning to crack. Before I could respond, a uniformed police officer stepped into the room. "Mrs. Wallace? I'm Detective Morales. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your son's condition." "Me?" I blinked in confusion. "Shouldn't you be asking—" I glanced meaningfully at Clara. "We'll speak with everyone," the detective assured me. "But first, Dr. Chen has informed us of a possible poisoning. Do you have any idea who might want to harm your son?" Clara let out a theatrical gasp. "Surely you don't think this was intentional? It must have been something environmental, maybe at his office. They're renovating the building next door." I watched her performance with growing clarity. Each gesture, each tear was calculated. How had I not seen through her before? "Detective?" David interjected. "I believe that lunchbox contains evidence. Mrs. Wallace brought it directly from her office after I noticed suspicious residue." Detective Morales nodded, calling for an evidence bag. As the lunchbox was sealed and labeled, I caught Clara's expression, a flash of pure terror quickly masked by concern. "Mrs. Wallace, could we speak privately?" Detective Morales asked, gesturing to the hallway. Once outside, I leaned against the wall for support. "It's her," I whispered. "Clara's been poisoning him." The detective's expression remained neutral. That's a serious accusation. What evidence do you have besides the lunchbox? I took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I updated my will. Benjamin inherits half my estate. Clara gets the other half. But there's a clause. If Benjamin dies before me, Clara inherits everything. Nearly $30 million. Detective Morales raised an eyebrow. And your daughter-in-law is aware of these terms? My lawyer went over it with both of them. Clara seemed oddly fixated on the details, asking questions about the company valuation, liquid assets. I ran a hand through my hair. I thought she was just being financially prudent. Has Benjamin shown any symptoms? Prior to today? Frequent stomach bugs, fatigue, headaches, guilt washed over me. I thought it was just stress. His job is demanding, and they've been trying for a baby. My voice trailed off as another realization hit me. Oh God, the fertility issues. What if that was her plan all along? To marry him, inherit everything, and then… Mrs. Wallace, Detective Morales interrupted gently. We need to proceed carefully. Accusations without concrete evidence can complicate the investigation. Test the food, I insisted. And I want independent tests done on Benjamin. I don't trust anything Clara might have told the doctors. We're already processing the lunchbox, the detective assured me. But there's something else you should consider. Her voice lowered. If your suspicions are correct, your son isn't safe as long as she has access to him. The implication sent ice through my veins. Clara was still in there with Benjamin. Still had access to his IV, his water, his food. Get her away from him, I whispered urgently. Please. Detective Morales nodded. We'll assign an officer to the room, cite hospital policy about limited visitors during testing, but we can't keep her away indefinitely without evidence. Then get the evidence, I said firmly. And in the meantime, I'm calling my lawyer, Samuel Harrison. He's the best in D.C. While Detective Morales arranged for Benjamin's protection, I stepped further down the hallway to call Samuel. He answered on the second ring. Maggie? Is everything all right? You never call during business hours. Sam? I need you at Georgetown University Hospital immediately. Benjamin's been poisoned, and I believe Clara is responsible. There was a moment of stunned silence. Are you certain? As certain as I can be without a confession. Please, Sam, I need your help navigating this legally. I'm on my way. Don't speak to the police without me present. I ended the call just as David approached, his expression grave. Lab confirmed it, Maggie. Arsenic in the food. A potentially lethal dose. My legs nearly gave out. David caught my arm, steadying me. They're moving Benjamin to intensive care, he continued. The good news is that they caught it relatively early. With proper treatment, he has a good chance of recovery. And Clara? Being questioned by another detective. She's insisting it must have been an accident, contamination from something in your kitchen. His jaw tightened. But the concentration was too high, too localized for that to be plausible. I leaned against him, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming me. How did I invite a monster into our lives, David? How did I not see her for what she was? Because she's good at what she does, he replied softly. People like Clara spend their entire lives perfecting their masks. You saw what she wanted you to see. Through the window of Benjamin's room, I could see them transferring my son to a gurney. His face was so pale, so still. My beautiful boy, who had survived the loss of his father only to be betrayed by the woman he loved. She won't get away with this, I whispered, more to myself than to David. I won't let her. As they wheeled, Benjamin passed us toward intensive care. His eyelids fluttered. For just a moment, his gaze met mine. Confused, frightened, but alive. I squeezed his hand as they passed. I'm here, Ben, I promised. I'm going to fix this. In the chaos that followed, forms to sign, doctors to consult, police to update, I caught a glimpse of Clara being escorted to a conference room by Detective Morales. She looked small suddenly, her designer outfit and perfect makeup incongruous in the sterile hospital setting. She must have felt my gaze because she turned, our eyes locking across the hallway. In that unguarded moment, I saw what lurked beneath her carefully constructed facade, cold calculation, and now, unmistakable fear. The game was over. She knew it, and I knew it. The only question that remained was how far she would go to escape the consequences of what she had done. Samuel Harrison arrived in a flurry of expensive cologne and determination, his briefcase clutched in one hand and his phone in the other. At 65, Sam was the best attorney in Washington. sharp as a tack and twice as pointed when it came to protecting his clients. "Maggie," he said, embracing me briefly. "I've already spoken with the detective. They're testing everything in your kitchen and Benjamin's house." His eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses, were grave. "You realize what you're accusing Clara of, don't you? This isn't just attempted murder. It's calculated, premeditated, and sustained over months." "I know exactly what I'm saying, Sam." I led him to a quiet corner of the waiting room. "I want her arrested. Today." Sam shook his head. "It's not that simple. The police need irrefutable evidence linking her to the poison. The lunchbox is compelling, but not conclusive. What more do they need?" My voice rose in frustration. "A signed confession?" "Ideally, yes." Sam's tone was measured, professional. "In the meantime, I filed an emergency restraining order to keep Clara away from Benjamin. The judge granted it based on the preliminary toxicology reports." Relief washed over me. At least Benjamin would be safe while he recovered. "There's something else we should discuss," Sam continued. "Your will. Given the circumstances, I strongly recommend changing the beneficiary clauses immediately." The thought hadn't even occurred to me. Clara still stood to inherit millions if anything happened to Benjamin or to me. "Do it," I said firmly. "Remove Clara completely." Sam nodded, making a note. "I'll have the papers ready by tomorrow. But Maggie, be prepared. Once Clara realizes she's been cut off, she might become desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, but they can also become dangerous." A chill ran down my spine. "You think she might come after me next?" "I think we shouldn't underestimate someone willing to slowly poison their spouse for financial gain." Sam's gaze was steady. "Where are you staying tonight?" I hadn't thought that far ahead. The idea of returning to my empty house, knowing Clara had a key, suddenly seemed terrifying. "She can stay with me," David said, appearing beside us. He'd been coordinating with the hospital staff, ensuring Benjamin received round-the-clock monitoring. "My guest room is always made up, and my building has security." Sam studied David thoughtfully. "That might be wise, at least until we have Clara in custody." Before I could respond, Dr. Chen approached, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Wallace, your son is awake. He's asking for you." I hurried to the ICU, Sam and David close behind me. Benjamin lay amid a tangle of tubes and monitors, his complexion ashen against the stark white sheets. But his eyes, his father's eyes, were alert. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "What happened?" I took his hand, so fragile in mine. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. You've been sick, but the doctors are helping you." Clara said it was food poisoning. His brow furrowed. "Is she here?" I exchanged a glance with Sam, who gave a subtle shake of his head. Now wasn't the time. "She had to step out," I said carefully. "Ben, the doctors think you might have been exposed to something toxic. Have you noticed anything unusual about your food lately? Or maybe someone at work who might want to harm you?" Confusion clouded his features. "Harm me? No, nothing like that." He shifted uncomfortably. "But I have been feeling terrible." Clara thought it was stress, maybe an ulcer. She's been so attentive, making all my meals, reminding me to take my vitamins. Each word felt like another piece clicking into a horrifying puzzle. The vitamins, of course. The perfect delivery method. Consistent, expected, controlled. "Ben," I said gently, "the police need to test those vitamins and everything else in your house." "Police?" Alarm due spread across his face. "Mom, what's really going on?" Sam stepped forward. "Benjamin, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but we have reason to believe you've been deliberately poisoned. With arsenic." Benjamin stared, uncomprehending. That's insane. Who would do that?" The room fell silent. I couldn't bring myself to say the words, to shatter his world completely. It was David who finally spoke. "The evidence strongly suggests Clara, Ben. I'm so sorry." Benjamin's laugh was hollow, disbelieving. "Clara, my wife? You think my wife has been poisoning me?" He tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. "Mom, tell them that's ridiculous." The pain in his eyes nearly broke me. "Ben, honey, I wish it wasn't true. But the food she prepared for you today contained arsenic. The symptoms you've been having for months are consistent with chronic arsenic poisoning." "No." He shook his head vehemently. "There has to be another explanation. Maybe something at work, or your mother's inheritance?" Sam interjected quietly. "Did Clara ever discuss it with you?" Benjamin hesitated, and in that moment, I could see doubt beginning to creep in. She asked about it a few times, especially after we had trouble conceiving. She joked that at least we'd be financially secure if we couldn't have children. A nurse appeared at the doorway. "Excuse me, but there's a Mrs. Wallace insisting on seeing her husband. She's becoming quite agitated." Fear gripped me. "She can't come in. There's a restraining order." "I'll handle it," Sam said, striding toward the door. "David, stay with them." After Sam left, Benjamin gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I need to see her, Mom. I need to hear whatever you're accusing her of from her own lips." "That's not a good idea, Ben. Not until you're stronger." "She's my wife." His voice broke. 7 years. We've been together 7 years. She couldn't. From the hallway came the sound of raised voices, Clara's, rising above the others in a pitch of indignation. "He's my husband. You can't keep me from him. Ben! Ben!" Benjamin flinched at the sound, doubt flickering across his face. "Mom," he whispered, "what if you're wrong? What if this is all some terrible mistake?" I stroked his hair, just as I had when he was a little boy waking from nightmares. "I wish it were, sweetheart, with all my heart." Security arrived to escort Clara from the premises. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of her. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, hair disheveled, the perfect mask finally slipping to reveal the desperation beneath. As they led her away, she locked eyes with me through the glass. Gone was any pretense of the dutiful daughter-in-law. In its place was pure hatred. That night, at David's spacious Georgetown apartment, I sat by the window overlooking the Potomac, unable to sleep. The events of the day played on endless loop in my mind. The lunchbox, Benjamin's gray face, Clara's venomous glare. David emerged from his study carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Chamomile," he said, handing one to me, though I'd offer whiskey if I thought it would help more. I accepted the tea with a grateful smile. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, the way she volunteered to make our lunches every day, how she insisted on being the one to give Benjamin his medications when he was sick, the pointed questions about my company valuation. David settled into the chair opposite mine. "Don't torture yourself, Maggie. Clara is a sociopath. They're experts at deception. But I invited her into our lives. I welcomed her as a daughter." My voice caught. "I left her half my estate in my will. You saw what she wanted you to see. What anyone would have seen. A loving wife, a devoted daughter-in-law." He leaned forward, his expression earnest in the soft lamplight. "The important thing is that you caught her before it was too late." My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morales. "Search I completed at both residences. Found arsenic compound in Clara's personal effects. Also discovered detailed notes on Benjamin's symptoms, dosages. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. to discuss charges." I showed the message to David, a weight lifting from my chest. "They found evidence. They can arrest her now." "Thank God." He set down his mug. "Benjamin will have to be told everything." I nodded, dreading that conversation more than anything. How do you tell your child that the person they loved most in the world tried to kill them? "With honesty and compassion," David replied simply, "and by being there to help pick up the pieces afterward." In the soft glow of the city lights, with the steady comfort of David's presence beside me, I allowed myself to believe that we might survive this. That Benjamin might heal, not just from the poison in his body, but from the deeper wound of betrayal. I didn't realize then how much worse things would get before we reached that healing, or that Clara had one more devastating card to play. The next morning dawned bright and clear, mocking the darkness of our situation. I'd barely slept, my dreams haunted by images of Clara standing over Benjamin's hospital bed, a vial of poison in hand. David insisted on making breakfast. Proper food, Maggie, not just coffee. Before driving me to the hospital to check on Benjamin, we found him sitting up in bed, color returning to his cheeks. A good sign, medically. But his eyes held a hollowness I recognized all too well. The same emptiness that had stared back at me from the mirror after losing my husband. "How are you feeling?" I asked, kissing his forehead. "Like an idiot," he replied flatly. "The police were here at dawn, showed me everything they found at the house." He looked up at me, devastation written across his features. "She kept a journal, Mom. Detailed notes about how much arsenic she was giving me, what symptoms I had, how long she thought it would take. Like I was some kind of science experiment." I sat on the edge of the bed, taking his hand in mine. "Ben, none of this is your fault. Isn't it?" Bitterness laced his words. "I brought her into our lives. I convinced you to trust her. Hell, I'm the one who suggested leaving her half your estate to strengthen our family bonds." He laughed humorlessly. "What a joke. You couldn't have known," David said from the doorway. "None of us could. Benjamin's gaze shifted to David, a question forming. You were there when it happened, weren't you? When Mom found out? David nodded. I recognized the residue on the lunchbox. Former toxicologist, he explained. Thank you, Benjamin said quietly, for saving my life. An uncomfortable silence fell. I could see Benjamin processing, his analytical mind, so like his father's, working through implications. They're arresting her today, I said finally. Detective Morales is meeting us at 9 to go over the charges. Benjamin nodded absently. I keep thinking about our last conversation. Yesterday morning, before I got sick, she kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me. His voice caught. Was any of it ever real? I had no answer for that. None of us did. Detective Morales arrived punctually at 9, accompanied by a district attorney, a stern woman named Caroline Fletcher with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. They set up in a small conference room provided by the hospital. Mrs. Wallace, Mr. Wallace, Detective Morales began. We have enough evidence to charge Clara Wallace with attempted murder in the first degree. The arsenic found in her possession matches the compound found in Benjamin's system and in the lunchbox. Her journal provides premeditation. What happens now? I asked. She'll be formally arrested this morning. Given the severity of the charges and the substantial evidence, we expect bail to be denied or set prohibitively high. Caroline Fletcher spoke up. We're building the strongest case possible, but it would help significantly if Benjamin is willing to testify. All eyes turned to my son. He sat straighter, jaw set. I'll testify. I want to look her in the eye when I do it. There's something else you should know, Detective Morales said, her tone shifting. We've been investigating Clara's background, and we've found some inconsistencies. What kind of inconsistencies? I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Clara Wallace isn't her real name. Her birth name is Claire Dunham. She has a history of fraud, including a previous marriage to an elderly man in Boston who died under suspicious circumstances. The case was investigated but never resulted in charges. Benjamin's face drained of color. She told me she grew up in Chicago, that her parents died in a car accident when she was in college. All fabricated, Fletcher confirmed. Her parents are very much alive in Florida. They haven't spoken to her in over a decade after she emptied their savings account. The revelations hit like physical blows. Clara, or Claire, wasn't just a poisoner. She was a complete fabrication, a predator who had targeted Benjamin specifically. Was anything about her real? Benjamin whispered. Detective Morales shook her head sympathetically. Very little, I'm afraid. Even her academic credentials were falsified. As the meeting concluded, my phone rang with a call from Sam. Maggie, where are you? His voice was tense. At the hospital, with Benjamin and the detectives. What's wrong? Clara's attorney just called me. She's claiming the arsenic was for household pests, that she had no idea it was dangerous. And, he hesitated, she's claiming Benjamin has been mentally abusive, that you've always hated her, and this is all a conspiracy to cut her out of the inheritance. Fury rose within me. That's absurd. We have evidence. I know, Maggie, but she's spinning a compelling narrative for the press. It's already hitting the local news. The press? I echoed, horrified. Channel 7 is running with it as we speak. Wealthy perfume company heiress and son-framed daughter-in-law to protect family fortune. It's sensationalist garbage, but it's getting attention. I ended the call, hands shaking. Clara's gone to the press, I told Benjamin and the detectives. She's claiming we're framing her. Detective Morales cursed under her breath. Classic deflection tactic we should have expected this. Benjamin's expression darkened. She's trying to control the narrative, just like she controlled everything else. Mr. Wallace, Caroline Fletcher said carefully, given this development, it's more important than ever that we present a united front. Would you be willing to make a statement to the press? The old Benjamin would have hesitated, uncomfortable with attention. But the man who sat before me now, pale but resolute, betrayed but unbowed, nodded without hesitation. Yes, I want everyone to know exactly what she did. Within hours, our private nightmare became public spectacle. Security had to be increased at the hospital as reporters gathered outside. My phone rang incessantly with calls from friends, business associates, and vulturous journalists seeking comment. At David's insistence, I agreed to a brief statement alongside Benjamin, who insisted on appearing despite his condition. Seated in a wheelchair, still attached to an IV, my son faced the cameras with quiet dignity. My wife, Clara Wallace, systematically poisoned me with arsenic over a period of months, he stated, his voice steady despite his obvious weakness. Her motive appears to have been financial gain through inheritance. I am cooperating fully with authorities and ask for privacy as I recover. As cameras flashed and questions were shouted, I stood behind my son, one hand on his shoulder. In that moment of public humiliation, with our family trauma splashed across headlines, I felt a strange pride in Benjamin's courage. Later, alone in Benjamin's hospital room, he turned to me, with tears in his eyes. I loved her, Mom. I really did. I held him as he wept, this grown man, my only child, feeling his body shake with sobs that seemed to come from the very core of his being. There were no words of comfort I could offer, no motherly wisdom that could ease this particular pain. All I could do was hold him, as I had when he skinned his knees as a child, when his father died, when he graduated college. Hold him and silently promise that somehow we would get through this. Outside, the media circus continued. Inside, in the quiet of that sterile room, we began the long process of healing. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters, their cameras and microphones thrust forward like weapons. Benjamin gripped my arm as we ascended, his body still weakened from the poisoning but his resolve unshakable. 6 weeks had passed since that fateful day with the lunchbox, and now we faced the beginning of Clara's trial. Mrs. Wallace, how does it feel to see your daughter-in-law on trial? A reporter shouted. Benjamin, will you be testifying against your wife? Called another. Sam Harrison, walking just ahead of us, turned with a stern expression. No questions at this time. My client's trust in the justice system to reveal the truth. The grand marble entrance of the Washington, D.C. Superior Court swallowed us, offering momentary respite from the media frenzy. Inside, David waited on a bench, standing when he saw us. Since the poisoning, he had become a constant in our lives, driving Benjamin to medical appointments, helping me field the endless calls from concerned friends and business associates, even staying late at my office to ensure nothing fell behind while I focused on Benjamin's recovery. You made it, he said, relieved. How are you both holding up? As well as can be expected, I replied, smoothing my navy suit jacket. I'd chosen it carefully that morning. Professional, understated, the armor of a wronged mother rather than the flashy wardrobe of the wealthy perfume heiress Clara's defense was painting me as. Benjamin merely nodded, his eyes fixed on the courtroom doors. Behind them waited Clara, the woman he had loved, the woman who had systematically poisoned him for months, the woman who still claimed innocence despite the mountain of evidence against her. Remember, Sam said quietly, Clara's attorney will try to provoke emotional responses. They want to paint you as vindictive, as using your wealth and influence to persecute her. Stay calm, stick to facts. District Attorney Caroline Fletcher approached, her briefcase clutched tightly. The judge is ready. Clara's already inside with her attorney. She hesitated. I should warn you, she looks different. Different how? I asked. Gone is the polished socialite, Fletcher said wryly. She's dressed down, minimal makeup. The vulnerable, misunderstood wife persona is in full effect. Benjamin's jaw tightened. Of course it is. We entered the courtroom together, a united front. And there she was, Clara, seated beside her attorney, a distinguished-looking man named Richard Ellison, known for defending wealthy clients regardless of their guilt. Fletcher was right. Clara had transformed herself. The designer clothes and perfect makeup were replaced by a modest gray dress, her hair pulled back simply. When she turned and saw Benjamin, her eyes filled with practiced tears. Ben, she mouthed, reaching slightly toward him before her attorney placed a restraining hand on her arm. Benjamin stiffened beside me, but said nothing as we took our seats behind the prosecution's table. Judge Harriet Winters entered, a formidable woman with 3 decades on the bench. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. The proceedings began with opening statements. Caroline Fletcher stood, her posture impeccable. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about betrayal in its most horrific form. Clara Wallace, born Claire Dunham, meticulously planned to murder her husband, Benjamin Wallace, through slow arsenic poisoning over a period of months. Her motive was simple: greed. Upon Benjamin's death, she stood to inherit millions through a clause in his mother's will. The evidence will show not only the presence of arsenic in Benjamin Wallace's system, but also Clara Wallace's detailed journal documenting symptoms and dosages, arsenic compounds found in her possession, and a history of similar suspicious behavior in a previous relationship. When Fletcher finished, Richard Ellison rose, his expression one of sorrowful conviction. Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is indeed about betrayal, but not by my client. Clara Wallace is a loving wife who has been scapegoated by her wealthy, controlling mother-in-law. Margaret Wallace never approved of Clara's marriage to her son. When Benjamin became ill from environmental arsenic exposure, common in older Washington homes, Margaret saw an opportunity. The so-called evidence was planted, the medical reports influenced by the Wallace family's considerable connections. Clara kept notes on her husband's mysterious illness out of concern, hoping to find a pattern that might help doctors. This trial is nothing less than a wealthy family using their power to destroy an innocent woman who dared to marry into their privileged world. I felt the blood drain from my face. Though Sam had prepared me for this line of defense, hearing it spoken aloud, hearing myself portrayed as a manipulative villain, struck deeper than expected. The prosecution's first witness was Dr. Chen, who calmly detailed Benjamin's condition upon admission to the hospital. Mr. Wallace presented with acute gastrointestinal distress, peripheral neuropathy, and cardiac arrhythmia, all consistent with arsenic poisoning. Subsequent testing confirmed elevated levels of arsenic in his system, with the pattern of distribution indicating chronic exposure over approximately 6 to 8 months. And in your professional opinion, Fletcher asked, could these symptoms and test results be explained by accidental environmental exposure? Dr. Chen shook his head. The concentrations found, particularly in the food from the lunchbox, were far too high to be environmental. This was deliberate. During cross-examination, Ellison attempted to undermine the doctor's certainty. Isn't it true that some older homes in D.C. have arsenic in their pipes, their paint, even their soil? Yes, and isn't it also true that arsenic can accumulate in the body over time, making it difficult to determine the exact source or time frame of exposure? Dr. Chen frowned. In theory, yes, but the concentrations found— Thank you, doctor. No further questions. Next came Detective Morales, who described the evidence found during the search of Benjamin and Clara's home. In a locked drawer in Mrs. Wallace's vanity, we found a small glass vial containing white powder, later confirmed to be arsenic trioxide. Nearby was a notebook with detailed entries dating back 8 months. She read from her notes. Day 47. Increased dosage to 3 mg. Symptoms: nausea, headache, visible hair loss. Starting. Estimate 2 to 3 months at current rate. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. I glanced at the jury, 7 women, 5 men, seeing horror dawn on their faces. We also found search history on Mrs. Wallace's personal laptop, including queries such as arsenic poisoning symptoms, how long to death by arsenic, and can arsenic poisoning be detected after death. Clara shook her head vehemently, whispering urgently to her attorney. When it was Ellison's turn, he focused on procedure. Detective, did you find Mrs. Wallace's fingerprints on this alleged vial of arsenic? The vial had been wiped clean. I see. And this notebook, did you verify the handwriting as belonging to my client? We had it analyzed. The experts believe it matches Mrs. Wallace's handwriting. Believe? So not conclusive then. And these internet searches? Couldn't they have been made by anyone with access to that computer? Technically, yes, but no further questions. By late afternoon, I felt drained. Clara had maintained her facade of wounded innocence throughout, occasionally dabbing at tears when testimony became particularly damning. The jury seemed conflicted, moved by the evidence, but perhaps also influenced by Clara's performance. As court adjourned for the day, Benjamin sagged slightly in his seat. You okay? I whispered, concerned. Just tired, he replied, and dreading tomorrow. Tomorrow, when Benjamin would take the stand. Outside, the media had multiplied. We exited through a side door, David having brought his car around to whisk us away from the courthouse. In the back seat, Benjamin leaned his head against the window, eyes closed. She looks exactly like she did on our first date, he said suddenly. The simple clothes, the minimal makeup. It's how she looked when I fell in love with her. David caught my gaze in the rearview mirror, concern evident. It's an act, Ben, I said gently, just like everything else about her. I know. He opened his eyes, staring at the Washington Monument as we passed. But it's a painful reminder of how completely she fooled me. Every moment, every memory I cherished, all of it was calculated. That night, at my house where Benjamin had been staying during his recovery, I found him in his childhood bedroom, looking through an old photo album. Remember this? He asked, pointing to a picture of us. At the National Zoo, Benjamin about 10 years old, me laughing as a butterfly landed on his nose. Of course, your father took that picture. I was thinking about something Dad used to say. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, like cream in coffee. He'd be glad you found the truth, Mom. Before it was too late, I sat beside him on the bed, putting my arm around his shoulders. He'd be proud of you, Ben. Your strength through all this. I don't feel strong, he admitted. I feel broken. But I'm going to face her tomorrow. I'm going to look her in the eye and tell the truth. That, I said, kissing his temple, is the very definition of strength. The second day of the trial brought with it a palpable tension. The courtroom was even more crowded, word having spread about, Benjamin's scheduled testimony. As we took our places, I noticed several of Benjamin's colleagues from the financial firm, along with a handful of my own employees. Their presence felt like a wall of support against the storm of Clara's lies. Benjamin had dressed meticulously, his father's cufflinks, a tie I'd given him last Christmas, small armor against what was to come. His hands, I noticed, were steady. Mine were not. Judge Winters called the court to order, and Caroline Fletcher wasted no time. The prosecution calls Benjamin Wallace to the stand. A hush fell as Benjamin rose and made his way to the witness box. Though weeks had passed since his hospitalization, his gait still betrayed lingering weakness, a visible reminder of how close we had come to losing him. After being sworn in, Benjamin faced Fletcher with composed dignity. Mr. Wallace, please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant. Benjamin's voice was clear, unwavering. I met Clara, then calling herself Clara Bennett, at a charity gala 7 years ago. We dated for 18 months before getting married. She presented herself as an orphan from Chicago, working in art curation. Our marriage was, I believed, happy and loving until recent events revealed otherwise. When did you first begin experiencing health problems? About 8 months ago. Initially just fatigue, which I attributed to work stress. Then stomach issues, headaches, hair loss. The symptoms would come and go, but gradually worsened. And how did the defendant respond to these symptoms? She appeared concerned. She insisted on preparing all my meals herself, saying store-bought food might be aggravating my condition. She gave me what she called vitamin supplements each morning. In retrospect, I believe that's when the poisoning began. Fletcher nodded sympathetically. Mr. Wallace, please describe the events of the day you were hospitalized. Benjamin recounted that morning, Clara preparing his lunch as usual, her insistence that he take an extra vitamin because he looked tired, the rapid onset of severe symptoms at work. I began vomiting uncontrollably. My heart was racing, and I felt a burning sensation in my extremities. A colleague called Clara, who arrived quickly and took me to Georgetown University Hospital. I was admitted with what doctors initially suspected was severe food poisoning. When did you learn the truth about your condition? Benjamin's eyes found mine briefly before returning to Fletcher. That evening when my mother arrived at the hospital, she told me that my lunch had contained arsenic and that Clara was suspected of poisoning me. What was your reaction? Disbelief, initially. Benjamin's composure faltered slightly. I didn't want to accept that my wife would deliberately harm me. But then the police showed me the evidence. The journal detailing my symptoms and the poison doses, the searches on her computer, the arsenic found in our home. The truth became undeniable. Fletcher approached the evidence table. I'd like to enter into evidence Exhibit 14, the notebook found in the defendant's vanity. She handed it to Benjamin. Can you identify any specific entries that correspond to your symptoms? Benjamin flipped through the pages, his face paling. February 3rd. Ben experiencing increased fatigue, complaining of tingling in fingers. Dosage seems effective but slow. Considering alternatives. That was the day I came home early from work because I could barely stay awake at my desk. After further questioning, Fletcher concluded, No further questions, Your Honor. Richard Ellison stood, straightening his tie. His approach was immediately sympathetic, almost paternal. Mr. Wallace, first let me say how sorry I am for your suffering. No one deserves to experience what you've gone through. He paused. I'd like to ask about your relationship with your mother. Benjamin frowned slightly. I'm close with my mother. We've always had a good relationship. Would you characterize her as protective, particularly after your father's death? Naturally, she's protective, but not excessively so. Ellison smiled indulgently. Mr. Wallace, isn't it true that your mother initially opposed your marriage to Clara? That she suggested you were rushing into things? Benjamin hesitated. She had concerns about how quickly we got engaged, yes. And isn't it true that tensions existed between your mother and wife? That Clara often felt scrutinized, judged by Margaret Wallace? My mother welcomed Clara into our family, Benjamin said firmly. She included her in her will, treated her like a daughter. Ellison pivoted. Let's discuss your health issues. You mentioned they began about 8 months ago. Isn't it true that around that same time, you and Clara began renovations on your historic townhome? Renovations that involved removing old paint and pipes? Yes, but... And you're aware that many old DC homes contain arsenic in their building materials? That environmental exposure is common during renovations? Benjamin's jaw tightened. The levels in my system were far too high for environmental exposure. According to doctors paid by your family, Ellison countered smoothly. Now, regarding the notebook, this alleged poisoning journal, isn't it true that Clara was researching your mysterious illness, documenting symptoms to help doctors find a diagnosis? The entries explicitly mention dosages of poison, Benjamin replied, a trace of anger finally breaking through. Interpretations can vary, Ellison said dismissively. One final question, Mr. Wallace. If your wife were truly trying to kill you, why would she rush you to the hospital when you became severely ill? Why not simply let nature take its course? Benjamin met his gaze steadily. Because she was maintaining her cover. The caring wife, concerned about her husband's mysterious illness. The perfect alibi. Ellison nodded, as if Benjamin had walked into a trap, or perhaps because she was genuinely concerned for her husband's well-being. No further questions. As Benjamin returned to his seat beside me, his composure finally cracked. His hand trembled as I grasped it, squeezing reassuringly. You did wonderfully, I whispered. The court recessed for lunch, in a private room provided for witnesses. Benjamin barely touched his sandwich, lost in thought. She's going to testify, isn't she? He asked suddenly. Sam nodded grimly. Almost certainly. And she'll be convincing, Ben. She'll cry, she'll profess her love for you. She'll paint your mother as the villain. I know. Benjamin set down his untouched food. I just want this to be over. When court resumed, the prosecution called their final witness, David Lawson. He described discovering the arsenic residue on the lunchbox, his toxicology background making him uniquely qualified to recognize the danger. In my 15 years working in toxicology, I've seen arsenic poisoning multiple times, he testified. The symptoms Benjamin exhibited matched the profile exactly. Ellison's cross-examination was brief but pointed. Dr. Lawson, isn't it true that you and Margaret Wallace have become close during these proceedings? That you've been seen dining together, visiting her home? David's expression remained professional. Mrs. Wallace and I have been friends and colleagues for years. I've supported her and Benjamin through this traumatic time, yes. Just friends? Ellison pressed. Objection, Fletcher interjected. Relevance. I'm establishing potential bias, Your Honor, Ellison argued. Overruled. Witness may answer. David met Ellison's gaze directly. Mrs. Wallace and I are friends. My identification of arsenic was based on scientific knowledge, not personal feelings. But if this whole poisoning accusation were to be proven false, it would be rather embarrassing for you professionally, wouldn't it? Ellison suggested. Not as embarrassing as allowing a poisoner to go free would be to my conscience, David replied calmly. With that, the prosecution rested. The defense would begin their case tomorrow, with Clara herself as their first witness. Outside the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. One broke through the others. Benjamin, do you still love your wife? Benjamin stopped, turning to face the cameras directly for the first time. I loved the person I thought Clara was. That person never existed. That evening, alone in my kitchen, I found myself staring at the cabinet where Clara's lunchboxes had once been stored. I had replaced everything in the house that she had touched, trying to exorcise her presence from our lives. The doorbell rang. David stood on the porch, holding a paper bag. I brought dinner, he said simply. Thought you and Ben might not feel up to cooking. Such a small kindness, but it nearly undid me. I'd been holding myself together so tightly, being strong for Benjamin, that I'd barely allowed myself to feel the depth of my own pain and fear. Thank you, I managed, stepping aside to let him in. Ben's resting upstairs. In the kitchen, as David, unpacked containers of pasta and salad. He paused. You're doing remarkably well, Maggie. Most people would have crumbled under this kind of stress. I don't have the luxury of crumbling, I replied, reaching for plates. Ben needs me to be strong. You're allowed to feel too, he said gently. What Clara did, what she tried to do, it didn't just happen to Benjamin. It happened to you as well. Something in his understanding, in the simple truth of his words, broke the dam I'd built around my emotions. Tears came suddenly, overwhelmingly. David pulled me into his arms without hesitation, holding me while I finally allowed myself to feel the full horror of what had nearly happened. The daughter-in-law I'd trusted, the son I'd nearly lost, the public humiliation we now endured. "I'm sorry," I whispered, pulling away and wiping my eyes. "Don't be." His hand remained on my shoulder, steady and warm. "You've been carrying everyone through this. Sometimes even the strongest people need a moment to break." As we prepared dinner together in companionable silence, I realized that in the midst of this nightmare, unexpected blessings had emerged. Benjamin and I had grown closer than we'd been in years. And David, steady, kind David, had become a rock for both of us. Tomorrow, Clara would take the stand. Tomorrow, we would face her lies once more. But tonight, in this moment of quiet friendship, I allowed myself to believe that somehow we would survive this storm. The courtroom fell silent as Clara took the stand. Gone was the modest gray dress from previous days, replaced by a pale blue outfit that made her appear younger, more vulnerable. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face scrubbed of all but the most minimal makeup. The transformation was calculated, no longer the sophisticated socialite, but the wrongfully accused wife, terrified and alone. I watched her face carefully as she was sworn in, searching for cracks in her performance. There were none. Clara had always been an excellent actress. Richard Ellison approached his client with the solicitous air of a concerned uncle. "Mrs. Wallace, how would you describe your marriage to Benjamin?" Clara's eyes filled with rehearsed tears. "It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Ben is my whole world. I still can't believe this is happening." "When did you first notice your husband becoming ill?" "About 8 months ago." Her voice quavered perfectly. "At first it was just tiredness, then stomach problems, headaches. I was so worried. I started making all his meals myself, researching healthy diets that might help. I kept notes on his symptoms, hoping to find patterns that might help the doctors. The prosecution claims these notes were documentation of poisoning. How do you respond?" Clara's expression shifted to one of wounded innocence. "That's a horrible distortion. I was tracking his symptoms out of concern. The word dosage referred to his supplements, vitamins and minerals I researched to help his condition." Ellison produced a copy of the notebook. "And these supplements came from where?" "Health food stores, online specialty shops. Ben's health was deteriorating. I was desperate to try anything that might help. When traditional medicine failed to diagnose him, I turned to alternative approaches." The narrative was clever, reframing her actions as those of a devoted wife turned amateur nutritionist, not a calculating poisoner. "Mrs. Wallace, did you ever purchase or possess arsenic?" Clara looked genuinely shocked. "Absolutely not. I would never bring something so dangerous into our home." "Then how do you explain the vial found in your vanity drawer?" "I can't," she said, appearing distressed. "I've never seen it before. It must have been planted there." "By whom?" Clara hesitated, glancing in my direction with apologetic reluctance. "I hate to say this, but Margaret never truly accepted me. She was always polite, but there was distance. After Ben got sick, things changed. She became more controlling, questioning my every move. When I found out she'd left me half her estate in her will, I was touched. But then, go on," Ellison encouraged. "Then I overheard her telling someone on the phone that she regretted it, that she was going to change it. She sounded angry, said she'd take care of things. I never imagined she'd go this far." Fury rose within me at her blatant lies. Sam placed a warning hand on my arm, sensing my reaction. "Let's discuss the day Benjamin was hospitalized," Ellison continued. "Walk us through what happened." Clara dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I prepared our lunches as usual. I got confused about which was which. They looked similar. Later, Ben's office called, saying he was violently ill. I rushed him to the hospital, terrified. The doctors mentioned poisoning, but I thought it must be food contamination, maybe from our home renovations. Then suddenly the police were searching our house, and Margaret was accusing me of trying to kill my own husband. You've been portrayed as a gold digger, someone who married Benjamin for his family's money. Is there any truth to that?" "None," Clara stated, firmly. "I fell in love with Ben before I knew anything about his family's wealth. I'm an independent woman. I had my own career in art curation. I never needed or wanted Margaret's money." Ellison nodded sympathetically. "No further questions, Your Honor." Caroline Fletcher rose, her expression stern. She let the silence linger a moment before beginning her cross-examination. "Mrs. Wallace, or should I say Ms. Dunham?" Fletcher began. Clara blinked rapidly. Wallace is my married name. But Dunham was your name before you married Benjamin, correct? Not Bennett, as you told him. I changed my name years ago. Bennett was a family name I adopted. Legally changed? Well, no, but... So you lied to Benjamin about your identity from the very beginning, Fletcher stated flatly. Just as you lied about being an orphan from Chicago, when in fact your parents are alive in Florida. Just as you lied about your educational background and your previous marriage to Harold Winters, an elderly man from Boston who died under suspicious circumstances shortly after changing his will in your favor. Clara's composure slipped for just a moment, her eyes hardening before the vulnerability. Mask returned. My past is complicated. I left home young, had to reinvent myself. Reinvent or deceive? Fletcher approached with a document. This is a police report from Boston, dated 7 years ago. It details an investigation into the sudden death of Harold Winters, age 79, whose new wife, Claire Winters, formerly Dunham, inherited his entire estate just 2 months after their marriage. The autopsy was inconclusive, but trace amounts of a substance consistent with arsenic were found. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Winters banged her gavel, calling for order. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, Clara insisted. They couldn't prove anything because I didn't do anything wrong. Couldn't prove or couldn't find enough evidence? Fletcher pressed. 3 months after Mr. Winters' death, you disappeared from Boston. 6 months later, Clara Bennett appeared in Washington, where you met Benjamin Wallace at a charity gala. Quite a coincidence that you happened to meet the son of one of Washington's wealthiest women. It was chance. I had no idea who he was. Fletcher changed tactics. Let's discuss your internet searches. How long to death by arsenic? Can arsenic poisoning be detected after death? Are these the searches of a concerned wife researching supplements? Those searches were taken out of context, Clara insisted, though her confidence was visibly wavering. I was researching toxins in our home renovation materials. Old houses can contain arsenic. And the vial of arsenic in your vanity drawer? Also research material? As I said, I never saw that before. It must have been planted. By Margaret Wallace? Who had no access to your locked drawer? Who was out of town the weekend before the search while you were home alone? Clara's eyes darted around the courtroom. Someone is framing me. Maybe it was David Lawson. He's in love with Margaret, anyone can see it. They're in this together. The desperation in her voice was no longer an act. Fletcher sensed the crack in Clara's facade and pressed harder. Mrs. Wallace, is it not true that you married Benjamin Wallace with the express purpose of eventually inheriting his mother's fortune? That when you learned of the clause in Margaret's will that would give you everything if Benjamin died first, you began systematically poisoning him? No, I loved him. I still love him. Fletcher produced another document. Your bank records, Mrs. Wallace. 6 separate purchases from chemical supply companies over the past year. Companies that sell, among other things, arsenic compounds. Those were for my art restoration work, Clara stammered. I use various chemicals, too. You claimed earlier you were an art curator, not a restorer, Fletcher interrupted. Which is it? Clara's eyes darted to her attorney, panic evident. The perfect mask was crumbling. And finally, Fletcher said, approaching with one last piece of evidence. Let's discuss this. She held up a small silver flash drive, retrieved from your personal laptop's hidden directory. A detailed timeline of Benjamin's expected decline, financial projections following his death, and, most damning, a draft of an obituary for Benjamin Wallace written 3 months ago, describing his tragic battle with an undiagnosed illness and how his devoted wife Clara was by his side until the end. The courtroom exploded in shocked murmurs. Clara's face drained of color. That's not... I didn't... She looked wildly around as if seeking escape. Her eyes locked with Benjamin's across the room, and for the first time the true Clara emerged, cold, calculating, furious at being caught. Would you like to revise your testimony, Mrs. Wallace? Fletcher asked quietly. Clara's breakdown was swift and dramatic. You don't understand, she hissed. Her gentle voice transformed into something harder, sharper. I deserve that money. I earned it. Do you have any idea what it's like playing the perfect wife for years? Listening to his boring stories? Pretending to care about his precious mother's approval? Ellison tried to interrupt, but Clara was beyond stopping. It was taking too long, she continued, eyes wild. Months of careful dosing, watching him get sick, then better, then sick again. I calculated it all so carefully. And then one stupid mix-up with the lunchboxes. She stopped abruptly, seeming to realize what she'd admitted. The courtroom was dead silent. Benjamin sat frozen beside me, his face ashen. I reached for his hand, finding it ice cold. Judge Winters leaned forward. "Mrs. Wallace, are you admitting to poisoning your husband?" Clara's attorney frantically whispered in her ear, but she shrugged him off. "Why not?" she said, her voice suddenly calm, almost amused. "You've already decided I'm guilty. Yes, I put arsenic in his food, in his vitamins, in his favorite tea. Tiny amounts, building slowly. It was perfect until Margaret interfered. Her confession hung in the air like poison itself. In that moment, Clara's mask fell completely, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath, a stranger to us all. Judge Winters called for order as the courtroom erupted. "In light of the defendant's confession, we will adjourn for the day. The jury will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments and deliberation." As Clara was led away in handcuffs, she turned back once, her eyes finding mine. There was no remorse there, only rage at being caught. The perfect daughter-in-law, the loving wife, all fiction, crafted by a predator who had nearly succeeded in her deadly plan. Outside, the media frenzy reached fever pitch. Reporters shouted questions about Clara's shocking confession. Cameras flashed incessantly. Benjamin, overwhelmed, leaned heavily against me. "Let's go home," I whispered, guiding him through the crowd to where David waited with the car. In the quiet sanctuary of my house, Benjamin finally broke down. She admitted it, so easily, like it meant nothing, to poison me day after day. I held my son as he wept, for the love he thought he'd had, for the years wasted, for the betrayal so deep it defied understanding. There was nothing I could say to ease this particular pain. Some wounds could only be felt, endured, and eventually, perhaps, healed by time. Later that night, after Benjamin had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, I sat on my porch, staring at the stars. David joined me, offering a cup of tea. "It's over, Maggie," he said gently. She confessed. "There will be no doubt now." "Is it really over?" I wondered aloud. "The trial, yes. But the damage she's done." I thought of Benjamin. The light gone from his eyes, his trust shattered. How does someone recover from that kind of betrayal? David's hand found mine in the darkness. With time, with love, with the knowledge that while one person betrayed him terribly, others stood by him without wavering. As I sat there in the quiet night, David's steady presence beside me, I allowed myself to hope that he was right, that somehow we would find our way forward from this nightmare. The verdict was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts. Clara's dramatic confession had eliminated any doubt. Judge Winters sentenced her to 25 years without possibility of parole, citing the calculated, cold-blooded nature of the crime and Clara's utter lack of remorse. As spring bloomed in Washington, the media frenzy gradually subsided. Our lives, shattered by betrayal, began the slow process of reassembly. Like a mosaic made of broken pieces, the pattern would, never be quite the same, but perhaps it could still become something beautiful in its own way. Benjamin threw himself into his recovery, both physical and emotional. The arsenic had done damage, some nerve issues in his extremities, lingering digestive problems, but the doctors were optimistic about his eventual recovery. The psychological wounds ran deeper. "I keep going over every moment, every conversation," he confessed one evening as we sat in my garden, the cherry blossoms floating down around us. "Looking for signs I missed. There must have been so many." "We see what we expect to see," I said gently. "You expected love, so you saw love. That's not weakness, Ben. That's humanity." He managed a small smile, rare these days, but appearing more frequently as weeks passed. "You saw. Through her, though. Not at first, but eventually. Your instincts were better than mine. Mother's intuition," I said lightly, though we both knew it was more than that. It was the wisdom that comes from living longer, from experiencing loss, from understanding that people are not always what they seem. Benjamin's focus on work helped. His firm had been understanding, giving him time to recover, before welcoming him back. His colleagues rallied around him, bringing meals, offering rides to medical appointments, creating a buffer of friendship against the loneliness that might have consumed him. As for me, I channeled my energy into my perfume company and into a new purpose born from our trauma. With Sam's help, I established the Benjamin Wallace Foundation for Domestic Abuse Awareness. focusing specifically on the often overlooked issue of men as victims. People don't talk about it, Benjamin said when I proposed the idea. Men being poisoned by their wives, men being abused. It feels embarrassing somehow, shameful. Which is exactly why we need to address it, I replied. Your story could help others recognize the signs, seek help before it's too late. The foundation became a healing project for us both. Benjamin, initially reluctant to speak publicly, gradually found his voice. His first speech at a domestic violence conference 6 months after the trial left the audience in tears and gave my son something I feared he might never reclaim: purpose. Through it all, David remained our steadfast support. His expertise as a former toxicologist proved invaluable. As Benjamin navigated his medical recovery, and his quiet strength became something I increasingly relied upon. What had begun as friendship deepened gradually into something more, though we both moved cautiously, respectful of the trauma we had all endured. It was David who suggested the trip to the Maine coast, 1 year after Clara's sentencing. You both need a change of scenery, he insisted. A place with no memories attached, no reporters lurking, just ocean and sky and space to breathe. The small coastal cottage he rented was perfect. Weathered gray shingles, a wraparound porch facing the Atlantic, isolation without loneliness. Benjamin came reluctantly, still uncomfortable with the idea of his mother and David as a couple, however undefined that relationship remained. I'm not trying to replace your father, David told him one evening as they walked along the beach. I know that's impossible, and I wouldn't want to, but I care deeply for your mother, and for you. Whatever form this takes, I hope we can find a way forward that respects what came before. I hadn't meant to overhear their conversation, but the ocean breeze carried their voices to where I sat on the porch. Benjamin's response brought tears to my eyes. My father would have liked you, he said simply. He valued honesty and kindness above all else. You have both. The next morning, I found Benjamin sitting on the rocks overlooking the water, the rising sun painting everything in gold. I joined him, wrapping a sweater around my shoulders against the early chill. I had a dream about Clara last night, he said without preamble. Not a nightmare, for once. Just a dream where I asked her why. Why me? Why us? What did she say? I asked. Nothing. She just faded away. He turned to me, his eyes clearer than I'd seen them in months. I realized something, Mom. I've been asking the wrong question all along. It was never about why she chose me. It was never even really about me at all. She would have done this to anyone who offered her what she wanted. I nodded, understanding dawning. You weren't targeted because of some flaw or weakness. You were targeted because you were kind, successful, trusting, all qualities to be proud of, not ashamed of. Exactly. He tossed a pebble into the waves. I can't let her take those parts of me. I won't. That evening, we built a bonfire on the beach. David produced a bottle of champagne and 3 glasses. What are we celebrating? I asked. New beginnings, he said simply, and the courage it takes to trust again after betrayal. Benjamin raised his glass. To truth, he said. It may take time, but it always rises to the surface. Like cream in coffee, I added, remembering his father's saying. As we sat by the fire, watching stars emerge, above the darkening ocean, I felt something shift within me, within us all. The pain wasn't gone. The scars would always remain, but healing had begun, not despite the broken places, but somehow through them, like light finding its way through cracks. 6 months later, Benjamin met Elise, a botanist who specialized in native Washington plants. Their relationship developed slowly, built on honesty and careful trust. When he finally brought her to Sunday dinner, I saw in his eyes something I had feared might never return: hope. David and I found our own path forward, choosing to marry in a simple ceremony by the Maine Ocean, with Benjamin as our only witness. At 54, I had never expected to find love again. Yet there it was, different from my first marriage, but no less precious for being unexpected. The foundation flourished, expanding its reach beyond Washington to become a national resource. Benjamin's story, shared with unflinching honesty, helped countless others recognize the subtle signs of poisoning and abuse. Letters poured in from men and women alike, thanking him for his courage, sharing their own journeys toward healing. 3 years after that fateful day with the lunchbox, I stood at the podium of our foundation's annual gala, looking out at the faces before me. Benjamin and Elise, David, colleagues and supporters who had become like family. Trust is precious, I said, echoing words I had spoken to Benjamin during our darkest days. but never blind. Love must always be protected by truth. Clara's actions nearly destroyed us, but in the end, love proved stronger than betrayal. I raised my glass, emotion tightening my throat. To those who have survived the unimaginable, to those still finding their way through darkness, and to the truth, which always, always finds its way to light. Later, as music filled the ballroom, I watched Benjamin lead Elise in a dance, his smile genuine, his movements unburdened by the past that had nearly claimed him. David's hand found mine, warm and reassuring. "He's going to be all right, isn't he?" I whispered. "More than all right," David replied. "Look at him, Maggie. He's thriving." And he was. We all were. Not despite what had happened, but because we had faced it together. Because we had refused to let darkness have the final word. The scar where trust had been broken would always remain, but around it, something new had grown, something stronger, wiser, more resilient. Not the blind trust of before, but a clear-eyed faith in those who had proven worthy of it. Some would call it a miracle, this healing after such betrayal. I called it the power of truth. Painful, necessary truth that had saved my son's life and, in saving him, had somehow saved us all.